Hey, Angela Ardolino here from Your Natural Dog, and today I'm so excited about my guest today. It's Greg Tilford, an herbalist of over 30 years and formulator for animal essentials. And today we're going to talk about what's the deal with alcohol. What's the difference between glycerin and alcohol extracts? Is alcohol actually safe for our pets? Can they metabolize it? We already know what it does to humans, but why is it okay to give to our pets? Or is it? So stay tuned. Me and Greg are going to do a deep dive on glycerites, alcohol tinctures, what's the difference, and what we should be looking for. Stay tuned. And we're back with Your Natural Dog and Greg Tilford. And I have been looking forward every time. I got to speak with you once at AHVMA, which was wonderful, but I am a big fan of yours. I've been following you for years. Love your products. Love how you can speak layman terms and for us all to understand them, including me. But I wanted to come on today because there's been a lot more talk about glycerin and, how glycerin that's used as a preservative and dog food is bad, but why is glycerin and a tincture good? And then, like that wasn't enough, but now there's this, glycerin versus alcohol argument that's resurfaced and all over the place. And I get messages on a daily basis about it. And I'm like, okay, I've got to address this. Let me bring Greg back on and talk about this. So I want to start with the difference, between glycerins. And what is the difference between the glycerin that we know that's being used as a preservative in dog food oftentimes, or sometimes soft chews? It's supposed to be retaining moisture. Why is that a bad thing when it's being used as a preservative over there? But then when it's being used in an herbal tincture like you make, it's a good thing. What's the difference between those two types of glycerin?
There shouldn't be any difference. And, in the pet food realm, it's basically used to soften things. It works somewhat as a preservative, but really to be an effective preservative, it has to be at least 50% of the product. So it's there to soften things. It's sweet. There shouldn't be any difference. There might be some confusion out there about the different grades of glycerin. Anything that goes in the mouth should be USP 99.7% pure, USP certified, US Pharmacopoeia, which is pharmaceutical and food grade. And there is nothing wrong with the use of that in pet food or tinctures. There's extraction issues with regard to using it for tinctures and such, but there shouldn't be the stigma attached unless people are listening to old news about how there used to be a lot of different grades of glycerin being used in the pet food and the human industry, and some of it wasn't so good. I mean, at its lowest grade, it's basically used for lamps and for lighting, fires and mines and stuff like that. But, that's far removed from the stuff that is USP 99.7% certified pure. And it's the reason why you'll see it to give an idea how safe it is. And it is generally regarded as safe for what that's worth with the FDA for humans and animals. But you see it a lot in dietetic foods. You'll see it in diabetic candies and cookies, and it's used as a sugar replacement because it softens, it makes brownies nice and chewy, and it's very, very sweet. And the beauty of it is it has no effect on blood sugar. It's not metabolized as a sugar at all.
How is it metabolized? What happens?
It's basically seen as the body and treated more like a triglyceride. Formally, in the scientific world, it's considered a medium chain alcohol. But, a lot of people think of alcohol and they think of the toxic substance we drink or isopropyl. There's a lot of different variations of alcohol, and some are, night and day different from one another. But it's not metabolized as sugar at all. It's metabolized more like a fat with a very low calorie count at that. So, I can't see any real reason why it should be prohibited as long as it's good quality stuff. It's good. It's the right grade of glycerin. And to my knowledge, you'd almost have to be intentionally putting something toxic into food in order to use the wrong glycerin these days, by the way it's marked and marketed.
But there can be, like you said, fuel for a lamp, which would be a petroleum-based glycerin.
Right.
And then there can be glycerin derived from corn or soy or GMO crop. And then there's organic vegetable glycerin.
Right.
So there's a choice. And of course, what I use is the vegetable glycerin, organic vegetable glycerin that's USP. So I just want people to understand that there's a difference. It's kind of like saying flavoring,
Right.
or, some of these other things that have such a broad inulin. That's another one I learned. And how many different cellulose, how many different versions of that there can be. It can be petroleum derived, or it can come from an actual vegetable.
Well, when you say stuff like inulin, you're talking about a chemical substance that's found in a lot of different things. Same with the fractions. The stuff I use is certified organic or sustainably harvested coconut palm oil. And you can get glycerin out of a lot of different sources. And as long as it's pure, non-GMO, and it's organic, it's still going to be glycerin by chemical structure. The fact is, it's those chemicals are shared amongst several different plants. And yes, it used to be derived from animal sources.
Wow.
It's not anymore. We don't almost never see that.
So how does someone know when they're reading glycerin on a label, whether it's the good one or the bad one?
Well, it's not going to be the bad one. It won't be out there for long before the recall happens if it's a bad one.
Because animals will get sick, or?
Yeah, the animal would get sick. It's toxic. And like I say, I really don't see any problem with those adulterants, because everybody who is inclined to use glycerin in an edible product, whether it be for humans or animals, the first thing they're going to run into is 99.7% USP certified. That's the key. It has to be USP certified for purity, and that makes it the grade that you want to use. And like I said, from my knowledge in the food industry, whether it be human or otherwise, I don't think anybody's using the bad stuff anymore.
And what about in tinctures?
Not in tinctures either. And I don't even know if in tinctures the bad stuff would even work. The chemical structure might not be pure enough. It's a humectant, and it's not only moisturizing and softening, but it draws moisture to it. That's why it works so well in tinctures, is because it actually draws constituents out of plants into the base, and it tastes sweet. So it has that distinct advantage over alcohol when feeding to dogs and cats, which I don't have any problem with feeding alcohol tinctures to dogs and cats. But in order to do that, you've got to dilute it down many, many times to make it palatable. And what it really amounts to at that point is, instead of having 1 milliliter of vile tasting liquid into the mouth of a cat that's trying to rip your fingers off, you've got 10 milliliters of vile tasting liquid that you've got to get in. So, early on in my career as an animal herbalist, I abandoned the whole idea, with compromises, of using alcohol tinctures in the product line I created for animal essentials and stuff.
Was the biggest reason because of that?
The biggest reason, especially initially, was palatability. I often tell my audiences, a medicine that cannot be administered is not a medicine. It's useless. So you have to trade off some things. Like, for instance, alcohol, it will extract a much broader range of chemicals, very beneficial chemical constituents, than glycerin will. I mean, it will break down resins, for instance. It will break down silymarin and things that aren't water soluble more effectively. And it goes down the line, but it tastes terrible. And in learning more about glycerin, I've also discovered that there's a couple other things at play that aren't in the books. One is that there are certain substances like mucilage and marshmallow, beta-glucans and mushrooms are way more conducive to being extracted into glycerin or preserved with glycerin than they are with alcohol.
Yep.
In fact, for marshmallow and the wonderful polysaccharide mucilage it contains, it has all of its attributes. It becomes a really nauseous mix if you try to do it in alcohol. It just doesn't work. And tannins, if you're trying to draw tannins, it doesn't work so well in alcohol either. So there's trade-offs, but what I found as the second part is when I first went into this, I was working with almost completely with veterinarians. I worked probably for the first almost 10 years of working with these formulating herbal extracts. I worked with vets, and I felt really bad because I was making herbal extracts into a glycerin base, and you look at all the pharmacopoeias and the herb reference books, and they say you can't use glycerin for that herb. But I'm sending it out to the vets, and I'm getting the same positive results back. And now in my life now, and what I've discovered in the evolution of an herbalist is that there's an energetic component really at a quantum physical level that enables herbs and mushrooms and all these things to work their magic. It's not just the chemicals per se, but it's the manner by which the chemicals are arranged energetically in the way they can communicate with the body. And that includes,
Amen. Amen.
the whole plant. And, the whole plant is greater than the parts, and the energetic of the plant is greater than the plant itself. So it really plays into the way homeopathy works when you think about it. There's nothing there but an energetic impression of the substance used to make that remedy, and it still works. It stimulates a response upon the body, and the body responds upon it. So I'm learning a lot more. There's a lot more depth to effective use of herbal medicine than I ever imagined and I probably never would have discovered it if I didn't have the challenges of getting it into the mouth of animals.
I love it. I hate putting the alcohol tinctures in my mouth. Burns. I don't want to take it. And then, when it came time to give it to one of my animals, I was like, this just doesn't feel right. It doesn't seem right. I mean, I have picky animals that will run from anything, but when they get spit and get it all out of their mouth and react the way they do, I'm like, this isn't a good thing. So yes, that's where I started also. But what I think the biggest confusion in the marketplace right now is that people think there's two choices. They think there's glycerites and tinctures, alcohol tinctures, which there's a third, category. And it's a third category that I don't know, are you a pioneer of this category? Because you were the first that I knew. Oh my God, thank God, Animal Essentials doesn't put alcohol in all of their stuff. Thank you. I'm not crazy. I'm not the only one thinks that there's something wrong with that. But I'm going to go ahead and call it out. I read an article on Dogs Naturally. They even quoted you, but they never mentioned what your product is. They said there are two choices, glycerites and alcohol tinctures. And that is not true. So I want you to explain what a glycerite is, what an alcohol tincture is, and then what you make is.
Well, we actually do glycerite tinctures primarily.
Oh, then maybe I have the definition wrong.
But
you remove. So I thought a glycerite tincture was you extract with the glycerin and then you preserve in the glycerin. You extract with the alcohol, remove the alcohol, and then preserve in glycerin?
Not all of them. It depends. Okay. It really depends on the physical and chemical characteristic of the plant. If alcohol doesn't have to be in the picture, it's not.
Good.
Most of the stuff I do is extracted directly with glycerin. There are some things that do not extract into glycerin, like milk thistle, silymarin milk thistle. And mine, I just leave the alcohol in, but we do other extracts, like, for instance, well, let me go back to milk thistle. It takes 70% alcohol to break the solvency barriers of the seed to get the silymarin out. And then it can be evaporated off, and then the glycerin can be theoretically added back. That doesn't work so good with milk thistle, because just to keep it into a soluble form in a bottle so it doesn't clump up in the bottle, it still has to have some alcohol in it. If you're buying a milk thistle tincture that says alcohol-free, and you don't have to shake it, and you're probably not getting much of the active silymarin out of it. It just isn't there, But again, energetically, it might still work. Now, another good example, and you're probably familiar with this, is with reishi mushroom. Reishi mushroom, all of the mushrooms are best extracted using the traditional water bath methods that have been used for 1,000 years. To get the beta-glucans out, to get the polysaccharides out, the good stuff. But in the case of reishi, there's also triterpenes, triterpenoid constituents, right? And those are not water soluble. Those are not soluble at all. They're not soluble in glycerin. So that mushroom requires a two-stage process. First, it'll be extracted in water. Then the mark, meaning the material that it was originally extracted from, will be another extraction in alcohol. Then that alcohol is evaporated off, and you're left with a thick extract with whatever percentage of water you're using, and that's added back in. So that's how we have to make totally active reishi. Otherwise, you're not getting the triterpenoids out.
Right. So back to the glycerite. So there's still a third category. There's the one that you do where you take it off. So if you do that with a mushroom extract, what is that categorized? It's not an alcohol tincture, and it's not a glycerite. It's
really what you call it is the finished product. So at the end, it's still going to be a glycerite.
Really? Even though it's not.
Even though you've used another step or stage in the process, you're just using alcohol to create the finished product of a glycerin-based tincture, because there's not going to be any alcohol
Because
left.
the argument is that glycerites are not as strong as an alcohol tincture.
Depends, again, as I mentioned earlier, that depends on a couple different things. The nature of the plant that's being extracted. And I'll just keep, mentioning polysaccharides, mucilage, tannins. There's a whole bunch of them. A lot of the sugars, the different plant sugars, they are more conducive to glycerin than they are to alcohol by far. And in the old days, and this is the way I was taught as an herbalist way back 110 years ago, is no, it was always said that alcohol extracts always make a superior tincture, and it's not always true, especially, knowing what we know now with the energetics of herbs and everything else, and the two-stage process that we can use if we want to get more of the alcohol-based insolvents out. But to say one's better than the other, they're both good. One's more palatable than the other. And, some of the insolubles that I would like to get out in glycerin don't come out, but the proof's in the pudding. And, 30 years of effective use with over 600 veterinarians around the world and hundreds of thousands of pet parents, it works. So
right.
That's good enough for me.
So you wrote a book, I think it was Pet for Herbs, where you were talking about how dogs metabolize alcohol and what your concerns were, and that alcohol shouldn't be in the finished product. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, when I talk in that book, especially that book, and that book, I wrote that in 1999, mind you, Herbs for Pets.
I know. Pioneer.
Right. Wow, pioneer.
You were.
I'm going to show up at the next lecture in a covered wagon.
Got your apothecary, got your herbs here, get right. Your herbs.
what was the question again? I'm sorry.
I forgot to. Oh, in your book, you had, I remember, like a list of reasons why alcohol shouldn't be in the finished product.
Well, it's very dehydrating. It's very oxidating. If you're using it all the time on a regular, frequent basis, it's going to dry out tissues. If you use it carelessly, you're going to have an alcohol toxicity issue. So why not just avoid it? And as I mentioned earlier, alcohol tinctures can be used very safely in dogs and cats, but it has to be diluted down for palatability. And you have to watch for the added side effects of alcohol. And usually it's just excessive salivation is to be expected, especially in cats with alcohol. So that just compounds the job of getting it into them. And then you're going to look for nausea and throwing up and all that other stuff. But it's better to use something that doesn't contain alcohol just in terms of safety and palatability than it is for alcohol.
I agree.
Glycerin or even a water extraction, even though they're not going to be as strong.
Okay, I completely agree with you. I'm doing my best to practice the do no harm. And I feel like I can almost always find a remedy that causes no additional harm, a remedy that works with the body instead of causing it to work harder or try to get rid of a toxin. But what I found very interesting is how dogs and cats, dogs especially, can't break down alcohol like we can. And oftentimes it will build up in their system. So it's even though it is safe and under small amounts, what makes no sense to me is people turn to herbal tinctures because they don't necessarily want to do the pharmaceuticals and their animal is suffering. And you've got a senior or geriatric. The last thing I want to do is throw some alcohol into his medicine. I just feel like there's an option. And I feel like that's the way it was always done. I remember having this conversation with Deb at Glacier Peak. And she's like, that's just the way we've always done it. But I'd really like to take the alcohol out now that we know there's a better way and there is a way to preserve it without having to have that side effect, basically. Why am I buying a tincture that I then have to dilute and figure out how to evaporate the product off? That's great for someone who practices with herbalism and those types of things. Exactly. But just the typical pet parent, they don't know that.
And that's the other side of the issue. When I first started in from the very day one, the first thing I wanted to make sure is everything I put out there is safe, that we know it's going to be safe in the mouths of anything that receives it. And it's safe in the hands of somebody that doesn't even know what an herb tincture is,
Exactly.
Somebody that's never picked up an herb in their life. And they don't have to worry about what we're talking about with a glycerin tincture because it can just be squirted directly in the mouth. The other thing is, as you mentioned, how people pick up herbs as a replacement for over-the-counter drugs or pharmaceuticals. And that's one of the biggest problems that exists out there, because it's when you take an herb, at least the way I formulate and use herbs, and try to replace it, and a replacement as an allopathic drug, you're really using it out of context. Because the best way to use herbs and what nature really intended them for is to support the body in what it's naturally designed to do for itself. And that's to be healthy. And so when we take an herb, we're just stimulating a deficient system or a deficient energetic or something in the body that needs assistance. We're not replacing it. We're not overloading it. We're not overbearing it with something. And
we're not turning something off.
And I believe very strongly in that. I call it the tonic approach, strengthening approach of herbal medicine. You won't see me use herbs like senna. You won't see me use herbs like cascara sagrada. Yes, their herbs are natural, but those are laxatives that work by forcing peristalsis, to force things out of the digestive tract to cause cramping and basically spasm in the colon to push stool out. That's not holistic. That's just using herbs in an allopathic sense. So if you want to get into the depth of finding out why your dog is constipated, of course, you're looking at diet, but you're also looking at liver function, because the liver is probably deficient at producing the enzymes and the acids and all the stuff that's necessary to break down food efficiently. So instead of jumping for, the blasting powder of laxatives, I just, I go for liver support and digestion and probiotics, and I improve the availability of food and the elimination of waste. That's what it's all about. And that's the holistic approach. So for people that are really interested in using herbs for pets, the biggest thing, I used to say, the first thing to consider is diet. You need to change diet. That's not true. The first thing that needs to be changed is the way you think. You got to get out of this push button, fix this, symptom mentality that we're all raised with, especially in the United States and in these first world countries. We're spoiled. Push button remedies to make headaches go away, for making fever go away. Fever is it's the starter pistol for the immune system. It increases circulation. It infuses blood and other, lymph into tissue so it can cleanse better. And it starts a process. And when we shut it off, what are we doing? We're working against the body again.
Right. We're also telling the body it doesn't have to do that anymore.
Right. We're honoring, the whole idea is to honor the body and what it's naturally designed to do, even if it hurts a little bit at first. Because, fevers aren't fun, but they do shorten the duration of illness. If you suppress it and suppress it and suppress it, you're just going to stay sick longer.
Very well said. What are over the 30 years, what are some of the biggest things you've seen in the industry? I feel just in the short time that I've been in this space, man, it's crazy. And I'm in the CBD full spectrum hemp space, and I'm constantly having to go, no, yes, no, that's an isolate. Don't do that. Then the same thing with herbs. You see the same thing across, where people are not extracting them right. They're not potent enough. They're not a therapeutic dose. They're, a cheap version. They have a poor preservative. But what are some of the crazy things? I mean, you must be fascinated with the mushroom craze.
Of course, mushrooms. I mean, mushrooms are amazing. I mean, you know that. I know that. And they're incredible. And that's a big, big thing, And the cool thing about mushrooms is you really can't make a mistake by taking them. They're going to do good things for you, and they're going to modulate immune functions. They're going to act as an antioxidant. They're going to act as an adaptogen. They're going to raise energy levels. They're amazing. And they've been amazing. I mean, we're one of the oldest medicines known to humankind, really. But what I'm seeing most of is the death of sensationalism. And I just got back from Global Pet Expo in Florida, right?
I didn't go, but my team went. You're a brave man. What did it look like? Tell me.
40% down from last year. Nobody coming across the ocean, from Europe for obvious reasons and stuff, but almost no CBD. Just a few booths of CBD. And so the reason I say that, I have nothing against CBD. I think it's wonderful. But when it first came out, it was just the flash in the pan. Yep. This is the newest craze, the greatest buzz. And if it appears on a label in any form, any concentration, it must be good, right? And
nope.
No, it's not. So What I'm seeing is a growing audience of informed consumers that know better than to just buy into buzz terms. They have an idea of what their animal needs, not them. They understand that their animals are different than they are. They're understanding something about the metabolic and digestive needs and just the natural nuances of a different form of life that they're taking care of. And they're more selective and more discriminating than they've ever been. And they're very discriminating about products. So I tend to focus my attention toward them instead of I used to always I had this thing that I said, one vet at a time, I'll change the world, right?
That was me.
Now I speak to the choir.
So do I.
Because the choir will communicate with way more people than I can by myself. And the choir knows now. The choir's learning that, okay, if it contains substance A, then what form is it in and how was it extracted or how much is there? And one of the biggest problems I see is these flash in the pan, jump on the gravy train products that contain a kitchen sink list of active ingredients in these tiny little fairy dust amounts that really won't do anything, I try to keep my formulas as simple as possible because if you get too many active components in there, they're diluted by the inactives and there's not enough for any one of them to really do what you want it to do. So I can see the consumer catching on to this and looking at a label going, wow, that's a lot of ingredients. Maybe I should consider one that has half of it, and it's 100 milligrams of what I want versus 10. People are catching on. They're becoming educated, and it really is up to the people taking care of these animals to make that change and to change the way they think about what they're buying and what they're putting in the mouths of their pets. And realizing that, it's good for me, it must be good for them. It's not always the case, and especially
right.
Food. I mean, I don't sit down for dinner and eat a bowl of green tripe myself. I don't know about you.
No, but I rode in a car yesterday on a road trip with two that did have it for breakfast, and do not do that.
Oh, it stinks, but they sure love it. It's too good for them.
They do love it.
Yeah.
The reason that I asked that question is because there are very smart consumers and they're getting diet and nutrition and reading labels. However, I feel like there's a 3.0, a 2.0, a 1.0. Those that have understood diet and feeding real food and now are getting in, even understand full spectrum, are kind of understanding mushrooms. But I get a lot of them that are coming back to me and saying, I don't understand. I'm doing everything. How did he get cancer? I don't understand. I'm doing everything. Why is he still having seizures? This is what really tipped it over for me was, I don't understand. This person actually makes raw food and said, I don't understand. He has copper storage disease. And I said, well, I would be happy to tell you how that happened. Because what I notice is that they fixed the diet. They've learned about a full spectrum hemp extracts, maybe some herbs. They're jumping on learning more about herbs and mushrooms, but the products they're using probably have like you just said, a therapeutic dose. Probably they don't have any mushrooms in them at all, and then have a whole list of inactive ingredients that are synthetic additives. This is what I've just came to the conclusion. You'll have to tell me if you agree that in an herbal holistic formulation, there should only be, other than the active ingredients, a safe preservative.
Well, a solvent preservative, yes.
Right. Other than that, these binders, fillers, dyes, flavoring are all added shit that should not be going into our animals' bodies.
Yeah, and at the very least, they're just detracting from the effectiveness of the actives because they're taking up space. I mean, there shouldn't be. In my formulas, it's vegetable glycerin and distilled water.
Yep.
And then
that's
a list
how it
of
should
herbs.
be. And you should know what it all is. There should be no weird words. You shouldn't be like, well, what is calcium plafiflate? Well, no.
Right. And the same with powders. There's a lot of really good powder extracts out there. That's the third category, where a liquid extract is powderized. It's dried.
Yeah.
But it's totally water soluble again. Those are great too. But if it's in a powder form, there has to be at least one natural preservative, whether it be rosemary oil or mixed tocopherol, vitamin E sort of thing or something. But other than that, it should be actives. Or, but what we see a lot of the time is palatants, all these flavoring agents, coloring agents, and all this stuff. And unfortunately, just like the pet food industry is still learning, the manufacturer is basically appeasing the senses of the human and not the needs of the animal.
Yep.
And the pet foods have been doing that forever. If it doesn't look good to us, if it doesn't smell good, if it's not a cool little fishy shape or it's different colors with all these dyes, then it's not attractive to us. When
I just
reality
asked somebody the other day. We were looking at a Zesty Paws in terrible ingredient list because it's like the number one multivitamin selling product, and it's got a list of inactive ingredients, a mile long, and one of them was a dye. I'm like, why is there a dye in a supplement? And
so it looks good to the
So it looks
person.
like it's got
a
carrot
in
it.
Yeah.
Yep. Crazy.
It's all about appeasing us. We're the ones buying it.
Right.
And we want to see Rover gobble it down. We want to say, oh, he likes these. These are great. It's the first thing we consider. And then when it doesn't work or he develops an allergy or, a sensitivity to something in it, then it's time to scratch the head because, wow, he really likes that. I wonder why it's not working.
Yeah.
Why is Purina killing my pet? He loves it.
It's got beef and chicken and vegetables on the bag.
Right. And that's another subject. I'm really seriously considering writing a book called the AFCO English AFCO Dictionary. So people can look on the back of a pet food label and they can actually interpret that ingredient by what AFCO's interpretation is. And boy, it really can be a lot different than what you think,
Yep. It's kind of like the definitions of marijuana and hemp. Right. Totally made up by our government, and they're totally make no sense. And we have to go, I know, but it's all cannabis, I swear.
It's all cannabis, I swear.
It's all cannabis. Well, I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Even learned some things. It's a hard world out there. And I want to say thank you for making such incredible products and being a mentor of mine, even though you didn't know you were. I was like, when I learned, every time I learned the bad way or the do no harm way, I should say, because that's who I am. I know there's a way. I would always end up at your products and your formulations and tinctures. So thank you for being such a hero in our space.
Thank you for your support. Thank you for saying all that. And thank you for what you do.
You bet.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you. I will.
It's obviously, it's all about love. As long as we keep it coming from the heart, we're doing good. That's where the do no harm comes from.
Yep.
You don't want to harm anything you love. And, I say that because unfortunately and unbelievably, there are a lot of manufacturers of pet products that really don't give a shit about pets.
No. And the reason there are those bad ingredients is because it's a lot cheaper to put those ingredients in there instead of do what we do. And they're more concentrating on what are our profits instead of what is the best. And when you do the best and you make pure, safe, do no harm products, especially over 30 years, people start talking and it grows. Vets start listening when they start seeing things clear up that they told the pet owner there was nothing else that could be done. Oh, well, dog's still here. What'd you do? Yeah, herbs and mushrooms. So makes sense. Well, again, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Angela.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Please make sure to leave us a review wherever you're listening from. This is the best way to help pet parents like you find these episodes and get access to all our content. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Your Natural Dog and at AngelaArdolino.com.